Welcome today. This is our exponential webinar show, Frontlines, and it's Frontlines everything, frontline ministry, frontline church planning. And I'm here with Daniel Yang. He's my co-host, partner in crime, and director of the Sin Institute, and just a fine guy all around. And me, there's not much to say about me, I guess, but you're here, and you're gonna have to listen to me.
You're pretty fine too, Peyton.
Pretty fly for a white guy, right? It's not bad. So, I'm here with Dai Hankey, and Dai Hankey is our guest today. I am so excited to have him on for multiple reasons. Number one, he was my best friend in the UK. We would say best mates when I lived there for 12 years as a missionary. And but that's not why he's on here, right? And we don't get to just have our best friends on here. But out of all the planners that I always think, man, I wish people knew this guy. And of course, the Atlantic Ocean is a huge dividing factor. But for Americans, let me just kind of walk you through who Dai is a little bit. He is a multiple church plant. Well, let me put it this way. He's a gospel animal. He is a minister over in Wales, UK. He came originally from Pontypool. He'll tell you a little bit about his background. And he ministered in a place called Trevethan, which was a valley town. He'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then today he's ministering at a church called Redeemer. Now he's got multiple books out, The Hardcore. He's got Offensive, Cross-German Ministry. He's got a series of children's books that are just dynamite if you're looking for children's books for your kids. He's an MC DJ. And I remember when I first planted, I had Dai do an event, and we did it for youth. And we pretty much kicked off this like pretty radical youth ministry that went on, and kids got saved. And I'll never forget, we're in this pub and the music's pumping out there, and Dai was drum and bass. And all the adults, all these drunk people outside, they couldn't come in. They're like, oh, come on, mate, you're wasting this on young people. Come on, do this for us. And the first time I ever heard of Dai was I heard about this guy in the capital city of Wales who there was this bus that would go around. It would do like MC DJ stuff. And I remember hearing it was just kind of like a local legend. And, but I never met him. And then I went to this Precepts Ministries, Kay Arthur. I went to Precepts, and there was this thing, and I walk into this room, and there's all of these like dudes, like old people, like in tweed jackets, like coats with leather elbows, and like they look like they would go out and smoke a pipe afterwards, like, oh, that was jolly good, And I look across this room, and there's this dude that looks like me. There's this guy, he's got like a hoodie on, he's kind of rough. And I remember we looked at each other at one point and we just went like, what's up? Like, one of these things is not like the others. And on the break, we just started talking. And from that moment, we pretty much just became instant friends. And at the time we were planning back in 2004-05, it was really before Acts 29 came on scene. Dai would eventually end up being the director of Acts 29 Wales. Together, we formed a network called New Breed, which I still run in the States to this day. And anything else about Dai, he's got 4 kids. He had the biggest dog I've ever seen at one time. I could just go on. This is a guy super respect, and it's so good to have you on here, Dai. Welcome.
Thanks, man. That's a nice intro. I remember that. I remember that KR for Bible study thing. That was a funny day.
I remember our first thing was like, how did you end up here? Like we just. So, Dai, tell us, you've planted a number of churches. You planted Hill City Church in the really rough council estate of Trevethan in the Valley communities. People don't really know what that is. And now you're planting in the capital city of Redeemer. Tell us a little bit, tell people about what it was like. Because here we think urban. Like, we don't really have the same as a council estate. Like here in America, you might say a trailer park, but even then it's not the same. Tell us a little bit about what a council estate is and what it was like to plant Hill City there.
Yeah, so in the UK, a lot of the social housing, so housing where the state is the landlord and they sort of lease out the housing to tenants. There's council housing all over the place, but often there'll be a concentration of council housing in a community, and that would be known as a council estate. It'd be an estate of houses deliberately built, for the purpose of gathering a lot of people together. You get private estates as well, like where you get like private houses, but council estates are generally social houses, cheaper housing, and would have a reputation of having people who are on lower incomes, and there'd be probably a lot more kind of social issues on council estates, or that would be the reputation at least. And so if you say council estate in the UK, people would normally think of a bit rougher, a bit more kind of dodgy. Certainly some council estates have very bad reputations. Got to say it's not all fair, because some council estates are great places. It depends on the size of it. It depends on how many generations have grown up there. It's interesting. There's one council estate I used to live on in Cardiff. It was a first generation council estate. It was built in the 70s, and I moved there in the 90s, early noughties, and there was just no sense of ownership or belonging there. Everyone had been moved in there from other parts of the city, and so everyone hated it. And so because they hated it, they trashed it. I remember being amazed, like there's really nice modern buildings, but they were all boarded up and burnt down, and it was just trashed. And it was because nobody wanted to be there. And oftentimes, the government or the local councils can use council estates as a place to just drop off people that they don't want to put anywhere else. And if you get the wrong mix of families in the community, you can just drag the community down. Likewise, if those people have moved on, then often the community can come up again. But social housing, social problems, pretty much, it's a council estate.
Hey, Dai, I mean, that helps me to understand a little bit better of your context. But, here in the States, we always hear so much about the UK, how it's further down the road in terms of secularism. And I know, obviously Wales is famous for the Welsh revivals. And I think in some ways, that's what I think about Wales. But I also know that today, slightly half of Welsh people would consider themselves Christians. Over a third would not. That's kind of where the U.S. is almost at as well. Can you give us a picture of kind of like the spiritual state of Wales and how that's actually changing the way that you're approaching mission this time around?
Absolutely. I'd be amazed if half of people in Wales claim to be a Christian. I think it's probably more like 5% would claim to have some kind of Christian kind of conviction, and probably maybe half of that, even like less than half, would be actual Bible believing Christians who've had an encounter with the risen Lord Jesus. Certainly, Christianity is off the map now. It's gone. We are in a mission context. There's our national sport in Wales is called rugby. You might have heard of it. It's like American football without the pads, and it's a pretty kind of rough game. We love it though, and it's very popular in the UK. But there's a phrase that I got taught when I was in school playing rugby, which is the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So, if you've got a big guy on the opposite team, hit him hard, because it'll hurt him more. If he hits the deck, then it'll hurt you. And so I think that's what's happening in Wales. Like, we were once upon a time probably one of the most Christian nations in the whole world. We're a tiny country, 3 million people, small, insignificant, kind of like, often treated like the UK's armpit. But we were sending, back in, there's a revival in 1904, there's one in 1859, there's like a history of revivals, chapels all over, the place, every street there was a chapel, everyone went to chapel, whether they believed in Jesus or not. It was just part of the culture. It's a very kind of passionate culture. So when people were passionate about Jesus, it just manifests itself in song, and then just like, passionate proclamation. Some great preachers have come from Wales, but the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And I think that now it's actually one of the most desperate places in Europe. There's a dearth of strong churches, and sometimes I look around at all the empty chapel buildings, and they've been turned into bingo halls or carpet warehouses or mosques, and I just hear the devil laughing, like, he's just mocking, 100 years ago. Well, you may be one way 100 or so years ago, but now look at you. And genuinely, we got Korea, who, like, the South Korean church was essentially, the gospel was brought there by a Welshman from not far from where I grew up, a guy called Robert Jermaine Thomas. He took the gospel to Korea, paid with his life. And now the Koreans are sending missionaries to Wales because, and so are the Chinese. And, we got loads of nations where there seems to be more Christians coming from other nations to help us, and us being a great sending nation, which is humbling, to be honest.
I can tell you, if you're not a bonehead and you want to preach the gospel, go to Wales, because they don't need any boneheads. But if you want to take the gospel, I can tell you, I spent 12 years of my life there as a missionary. I wake up every day, no exaggeration, wishing I was still there. That's a long story. There's a reason I'm not. Has to do with adopting my little girl. But here's the deal: that place, there's more than enough mission in Wales for sure.
Yeah, amen. There is.
So Dai, tell us a little bit about, okay, so I want to get to kind of our subject here, business's mission. You started a company called Manumit, and I know that's a bit of a story that works, particularly your passion about trafficking, stopping trafficking, anti-slavery, that kind of stuff. Unpack kind of that story, because when I left Wales, you were doing Acts 29, and you were literally you were planting, and you were kind of like a model. Like, other people are looking, like, Dai didn't just go where the money is. He went where the need is. He went into some of the darkest holes, in that you can find, and planted there. And you really inspired people to do that. But you continue to inspire by kind of pushing out, like, the fact that, like, we talk here in America, like, doing business as mission, where, like, millionaires are ready to drop money on people, right? But in Wales, like, you're going into depressed areas and you're starting business as mission. How does that look? How did that happen? Where did that vision and passion come from?
Okay, it's going to require a bit of a monologue, if that's all right. So, after going
Totally down, man. Take your time.
Yeah, so I was pastoring in the valleys in a town called Trevethin, and it's where I'm from. It's a town I grew up, and I loved it there. I still am very close to the church there. Like, I didn't fall out with the church at all. Loved being the pastor there. But one day, this mad thing happened, and I won't go into the full details of the backstory, but I had a vision from God, without sounding like the Blues Brothers too much. I was at a meeting when the Lord, by the Spirit, gave me a vision of a prostitute walking around the red light district in Cardiff. And I audibly heard the voice of God shouting at me, "Go and rescue her, go and rescue her, go and rescue her." And that was on the 6th of May, 2012. And it was the maddest thing. Apart from my conversion, when I actually, encountered Jesus for the first time and he saved me. Apart from that, it was the most profoundly impacting thing that's ever happened to me. I knew I'd heard God's voice. I never heard it before or since, nothing like that. But I had this extreme moment where I was just bursting into tears, because I was like, God shouting at me. And it wasn't like an angry shout, but it was an urgent shout. And I was like, I was convinced I had to go to that area that night because somebody needed rescuing. So I drove there that night, expecting to have to rescue someone, just curb crawling around this red light district looking for someone to rescue, but there was no one there. It was the weirdest thing. There was like nothing happened. So it's a bit of an anticlimax. And I was there with my fist clenched. I was like ready to do whatever was needed, but there was nothing to do. So I got quite sort of confused. I went home and said to my wife, I was like, "Babes, God just shouted at me. I don't know what to do about it." And so she said, well, maybe God wasn't trying to get your attention about an individual person. Maybe God's trying to get your attention about an issue rather than about a person. And so I thought that's wise counsel. All my best counsels come from my wife throughout my life. And so, so she said, "Well, what is happening for the gospel among the red light district, prostitutes, etc. in Cardiff?" I was like, "I don't really know." So I did a bit of research, and I touched base with a lady who's now a good friend of mine who works with women who are in sex work, either on the streets, both on the streets and also in brothels. And she seeks to reach out to them with the gospel. And so I said to her, I've had this mad thing. God just shouted at me. I don't know what to do about it. Can we have a chat about it? And so she said, okay. And as we talked things out, she said, "Look, Dai, on the front end, there's not a lot you can do. On the front end, reaching women who are involved in this work, firstly, you're a bloke. There's not a lot you can do. But secondly, there's a lot of us, on the team, and there's other people doing it as well. Like the need isn't to reach the women at that point that where they're at. There's people that can do that. You're a bloke. You probably aren't one of them." And she said, on the far end, there's also a lot that can be a lot that's happening. There's safe houses, there's refuges, there's addiction centers, rehabs, but that's taken care of as well. Like, if we have women that need to get out of the city or get out of the sex industry, we got places we can send them. So that's kind of covered as well. I said, well, why is God shouting at me then? And she said, well, the bit which is missing is the bit in the middle. So I said, well, what's the bit in the middle? And she said, well, what we need is to know where we can point these women who are living in community. So if they needed to go to church or they wanted to connect with, with a body of believers, we would, we're struggling to know what sort of church we could send them to. And so I asked a bit of a stupid question, and I know it's a stupid question. I said, well, where do prostitutes live in Cardiff? Like, and obviously they live everywhere. Like, it isn't like just one area, but there was a particular concentration, and there still is a particular concentration of vulnerable and exploited women and women who are engaged in this sort of work in the inner city of Cardiff, in the area where I'd been given this vision. And so I said, well, is there a church in that community right now where you would be comfortable sending your ladies to? And she said, no. And so I said, well, do you think if I planted a church in that community, that might make sense of what God shouted at me for? She said, Dai, that's exactly what's needed. So essentially, just talking to this woman and not wanting to reinvent the wheel and not wanting to just coming out the cavalry, it ended up us agreeing that perhaps a church needed to be planted in the red light district area of Cardiff. So I sort of did what was needed. I didn't rush into it. I didn't want to leave my church in Pontypool badly. So although that happened in 2012, it wasn't until 2016 that I actually left. I wanted to leave well. Everything happened which could have happened to try and stop that happening. There's all sorts of problems, all sorts of issues, all sorts of like chaos. Not my fault, I don't think, but like, just stuff which just made it very difficult to leave until it was the right time to leave. And God, over those 4 years, I spent time researching trafficking, researching prostitution, researching exploitation, slavery, and just got more and more educated, and just started praying. Started a prayer movement in the city. I'm a big believer that the best thing you can do when you don't know what to do is pray. And I didn't really know what to do, so I started a monthly prayer meeting. We just prayed in that community every month, once a month, every month for the whole of 2013. And that's really where even now there's some of the people that are in my church, even living on my street, we're part of that prayer meeting, and that's how we kind of got to know each other, and that kind of developed into a charity called Red Community that I run. It's a charity with a specific focus on it's a gospel-centered response to human trafficking and modern slavery in Wales. And part of one of the projects that we set up through Red Community was a project called Embrace, which was a befriending project where we basically train up local Christians, men and predominantly women, to befriend women who've been trafficked and rescued and are now trying to rebuild their lives in community. We train up women to just befriend them, to be their friends, just to offer nothing more glamorous than friendship, at least 2 hours a week of just like going for coffees, going to libraries, going to birthday parties, going for walks in the park, whatever it is, just like befriending these women and just offering them, gospel friendship. And very early on in the Embrace project, we started getting feedback from the people that were befrienders saying, Dai, the woman I'm befriending, she really wants to get back into work. Like, she wants to start rebuilding her life, but the thought of a 9 to 5, 5 days a week job in the secular workplace is quite daunting. Is there anything that we could do to kind of like help to make that step back into full-time employment an easier step? So as a charity, we had a chat about it. By the way, a charity is like a not-for-profit. Or you have a word from down here in America for charity. I can't remember what your word is.
Yeah, we just say nonprofit.
Yeah, one of them. So we had a chat, and my dream was, and I started actually a conversation with Starbucks, would you believe? My dream was to get these women trained up as baristas so that they could have a qualification which would be internationally useful. And wherever they went, they had a qualification, a skill where they could, it makes them less re-traffickable. Because one of the things I learned was that the re-trafficking rate is terrifying. Just because somebody's been rescued, if nothing's done about the vulnerability that made them vulnerable, that made them exploitable in the first place, they can just get re-trafficked again. And oftentimes the same vulnerabilities remain, the same networks remain in place, and it's still quite sketchy. So I thought some kind of a barista qualification would be a helpful way of giving them a chance of getting alternative employment. And I was quite far down the path with Starbucks, but then the girl I was connecting with, I think she either left or got sacked or something, so that dried up. So I said to my charity, let's just start a coffee shop, innit? And they were like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. But then one of the trustees very wisely said, Dai, you don't want to pack a coffee shop full of women who've been trafficked. Like, that's such a socially demanding environment. for people who have been like, through what these guys have been through, like that's not going to work. And plus, if our USP is we're offering employment to survivors of modern slavery, everyone who comes in is going to know that that woman was forced into prostitution or forced into, whatever else, that servitude that they've suffered. And so he said that's not a good idea. I was like, okay. He said, but why don't we try something else? Let's try setting up a coffee roastery. I was like, well, how does that work? Something, I love coffee. Obviously, coffee is Christian crack cocaine. So like, I'm as addicted as the next man, but I didn't know how you made it apart from putting it in, putting hot water on it. And so he just explained, look, you can do it in a anonymous industrial unit. It's quiet. You can sort of make it, you can safeguard it. No one even needs to know what's happening in there. And it's, you can just employ a small number of people, put the emphasis on support and just rebuilding lives and on regaining trust. And so we did. We pushed a few doors, and long story short, we set up a business separate to the charity. The thinking being, if the business bombs, we don't want to take the charity with it. And likewise, if a business explodes in a good way, we don't want to sort of like have all the complications, and sort of drag the charity into that. And so we just sort of set it up as a separate business. Myself and one of the other trustees, a really good friend of mine called Nick, we set that up together back in 2017. We started and started to employ survivors of modern slavery to roast coffee. That's a long story short.
Man, that's awesome. Dai, I think so many times when people think about business as missions, they think about it as a financial front to do like business or to do ministry under the table. Obviously, that's not what you're talking about. It's so much of what you just described is really building a pathway for some of the women that you've worked, come out of the sex industry, and to be able to have a dignified way to make a living, but also be discipled. Can you talk more about how the relationship is between Red Community, which is the charity that you're talking about, Manumet, which is the business roaster, coffee roaster, and then your church planting, Redeemer? Like, what's the relationship specifically? How do you split your time? It doesn't sound like you're doing this for money. This is all ministry all around. You're not just trying to make a paycheck.
Yeah, the mad thing is I don't get paid for any of it. I don't get paid by the church. I don't get paid by the charity. And I don't get paid by the coffee either. So,
and I think it's important for people to hear that, our listeners to hear that. Like, when they hear business as mission, I don't want them to think that that's a way to make money while you're doing mission.
No, not at all. I mean,
what you're talking about is,
I don't think that's completely illegitimate. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Paul probably got paid for his tents, but certainly for me, it's all just been like trying to follow the breadcrumbs a little bit, just trying to be obedient. And every time God's given me a nudge to like be faithful to do it. Now I've been living by faith ever since I started doing gospel ministry back in 1999. I've never had a proper salary. I still haven't got a pension. Everyone freaks out when you hear that. I'm just banking on one of my kids hitting the big time and sorting me out when I'm old. But that might not happen. But I don't get paid a lot of money. I do what I'm doing because God's told me to do it, and I'm more scared of saying no to God than anything. And so the relationship sort of breaks down as before. I mean, it's hard to talk about it pre-COVID and post-COVID because everything changed with COVID, didn't it? But in a normal world pre-COVID, I was probably 3 days a week doing stuff for the church, probably a day to a day and a half a week doing Manumet, and probably half a day a week, if maybe 2 days a month, Red Community. It's all in the same. Everything happens in the same area. We're in the same community, so like I live in the same community as where that vision was. So I'm a big believer in living incarnationally, where you want to have an impact. So we don't do any sort of driving in and driving out again. We live locally. The coffee is roasted locally, although no one knows where because we've got an anonymous unit. The church is in the same community, and that's a cool story as well. By the way, we got given one of those old abandoned church buildings. There was a church that was about to close, and we got given it for free. So that was quite cool. We were a house church until then, and my vision was to be a house church movement. But when you get offered something like that in a community like ours, and it was the right move for our church at that time. So, and it's a hugely diverse community. So one of the areas where Redeemer has kind of taken on almost a life of its own, regardless of, it was nothing to do with why I moved to the inner city. We moved to the inner city to respond to that call of God. But I mean, our ministry to the nations this is a big difference between the Hill City Church I planted in the valleys, which was, I would say, 98% white, and Welsh white, most of them as well. Like, you know, nobody's ever moved out of the community. You know, it's just like, you know, it's just gloriously Welsh. The Welsh members of the church where I am now are the significant minority. We got twice as many Nigerians as we've got Welsh people in our church. I think we had a Sunday when we could, you know, when we were packing the, you know, the kind of services out, because we'd eat together before church every Sunday. We've got a massive emphasis on hospitality, so people would just come and eat our food, and sometimes they stay for church, sometimes they just go. But you know, I think one Sunday we had about maybe 50 people there, and I think there's 24 nations represented. It was crazy. It was just, you know, it was so many different nations present, you know, from Africa, from Asia, from Americas, from across Europe. And so the church is a crazy diverse church. So like that's brought its own set of challenges, as well as there's a beauty in it, because we celebrate Revelation 7 every Sunday. You know, we just celebrate the fact that people pray in different languages and people have different worship styles, and people, you know, have very different kind of backgrounds. And you know, when we were eating together, people would bring their own foods, and we celebrate their cultures through food. So that, you know, that was a real enriching thing. And what COVID has ripped the heart out of our hospitality ministry, which I'm devastated about. But you know, the kind of heart is still there, and you know, but it also brings this unique set of pastoral problems. You know, when people don't speak English very well, you know, you think you've told somebody some pastoral guidance and they completely missed it, and then you got to try and help them to sort of like work out following Jesus. Some of them have only been following Jesus for 2 minutes, and they don't speak English, and it's messy. It's the messiest thing I've ever been involved in my life. You know, I'm trusting that Jesus is still building his church, but I got no idea what cement he's using.
If that's the messiest thing you've been through, that's saying a lot. Because I remember kids like running in your door once when you open it and ripping off your TV before you could stop them. You know, pushing past everybody, ripping your DVD player, and then boom, out they went. So,
it's
brother,
different. It's different. Like, so to me now, I look back on the kind of inner city crime stuff, and that's like, although it was rough and it was like upsetting, it was normal. But there's just this whole new kind of like world of like, you know, I mean, I probably know more about asylum law than I do about theology at the moment. Like, I just spend so much time with asylum seekers, like, you know, and like, you know, just trying to help people to make sense of court situations, and you know, you just get sucked into this and all the stuff which comes with it, man. And it's beautiful, but it's bonkers. I don't.
Dai, I want to pull back a little bit, because I think you're hitting on something that's so important for, you know, typically our Exponential Frontlines listeners, because most of us are traditional church pastors. I think a lot of us are. And I mean, just hearing your story, what you're showing many of us, which I think, you know, in some ways, a lot of our cities in North America is headed towards, is when you are a missionary that you want to engage the issues of society, and then you're dealing with the complexity of like immigration, which, I mean, again, the UK in some ways is a couple of maybe a decade or two ahead of us in North America. Your church doesn't look like the traditional church of, you know, 40 years ago.
No.
You don't do ministry the same way that you might have, you know, 40 years ago when we were starting churches more so as worship services. And so I think you've articulated well for us the challenge, but also, you know, your model and your solution. And I want to dig a little bit deeper into being a pastor of a urban, you know, low-income area where there's a lot of immigrants. Like, what are some of the bright spots that you're seeing with your church community that you know that, man, if I wasn't planting in this way, I don't think we would see these things happen? You know, what are some of the unique things that you're seeing based on your engagement of Cardiff and the way that you're doing it, that you're thinking, man, this is like, you know, there's other ways to do it, but this is the reason why we're doing it this way?
I think there's a couple of things. Like, to me, as I said, the most important thing from my perspective is living among the people that you want to reach. I just think hit and run evangelism it just doesn't work. Like, I think the people have been trying that for a long time in Wales. Like, they'll They'll come in, they'll flyer an area, they'll put posters up, they'll put on an event, they'll do it, and then they're gone. And there's just nothing until the next time they turn up and they do it. And I just think that the Lord has called his people to be a community on mission. And I think that there's nothing more compelling than a community of Christians who do 7-day-a-week Christianity together, where they're at the school gates every day of the week, and they're supporting one another, and they're praying for one another, they're caring for one another. And if something goes down, like, they're there, and the neighbors will see that they're there, and they see, like, there's these people who stick together, and they work through their crap, and they forgive each other. And I think that, I just think it's just that's how people see. This is how the world will know you're my disciples, if you love one another. But if you can't see that community in action, then you don't see the love in the same way. Sunday services, it can be the fakest things in the world, but you can't fake authentic community. So I reckon that from my perspective, living among the people that you're trying to reach is key. And I think that's why there's always been a problem reaching rough communities, because you've got people that will identify there's a community that has need, but the solution really involves people moving in to be part of the solution. It's like, let's invest money in, somebody whose job it is to go and do stuff and then come out, and then do stuff and come out. And that might work in some context, but it's never worked in the context I've been ministering. So living there is one. And the second, I would say, which is huge, and I didn't get this when I first planted Hill City Church, the church up in the valleys, the church I used to lead. That was very much, it was a preaching center. I was very strong on proclamational evangelism. I still am, by the way. I think that you have to proclaim the gospel. That's how faith comes through hearing. So I believe in that. I haven't dumbed that down. But I've just, along with my wife, just discovered a real passion for hospitality, for opening your home and just opening your heart and opening your lives to people, whether or not they embrace Jesus or not. Being willing to just sort of like show something of the radical, welcome of Christ and the radical, reaching in of Christ. And I think that's been huge, not just for me and my wife, but for my children as well. My children have grown up, by God's grace. Like, my kids are now they're age 10, 12. I've got 2 twins who are 10. And I got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. When we moved here, that was obviously 4 or 5 years ago. They were 6 and 8 and 10 or something like that. And they've just seen some amazing things happen around their dining room table and in their back garden. And they just seen, like, friendship breed discipleship, breed salvation, breed, church growth, and people that, like, came in as strangers, and people that they just want, they want with them for Christmas. And that's been beautiful. Like, and I think there's something which, whatever context we're in, whether it's rich or poor, whether it's black or white, whether it's mixed, whether it's in the West or in Africa or whatever, hospitality is an amazing way of reaching people, especially when you're not only the one that wants to give hospitality, but you're willing to receive hospitality. There's this one family in our church, family of Syrians, who walked to the UK from Syria, from fleeing ISIS. 7 months it took them, physically, emotionally, just wrecked, and still now very much feeling the impact and the PTSD effects of what happened. But we befriended them as Muslims. We invited them to our house. My wife decided to make Syrian pizza, and when we invited them over, the matriarch of the family, Mama, we call her, she showed Michelle how to make pizzas, and she was like smashing his dough on the table and like was beating up with her fists, and my kids were loving it. And we had this great time, and they had an Arabic friend who was also Muslim, came and was like translating, so she was translating our gospel conversation for these Syrians into Arabic. And they've since come to Christ, both of them. They were baptized last year. But the maddest thing wasn't like that we invited them into our house, although that was quite a mad thing for my kids. These 2 people, a mother and daughter, and their son, actually. So there's 3 of them came. Never met them before. Crazy stories, like just showing us videos on their phones of all the kind of bullets and bombs of Syria. We had to ask them to stop because it's so traumatic for the kids. But the following week, they invited us to their house, and they had no furniture. They had, those big sort of reflective screens that photographers use for like reflecting the light, and stuff. That was their tablecloth on the floor. I don't know where they got it from, but they just laid this big reflective screen on the floor and just brought in all this mad Syrian food that literally was terrifying to look at. Like, some of it was like, what the heck is that? And we just made our children eat it, so for the sake of not being rude. But like, for us to receive their hospitality as well as to offer our hospitality was massive. otherwise it's just a patronizing gospel. Do you know what I mean? But there's just real meeting, there's real merging of culture, there's real affirmation of one another, regardless of, like, you know, what our starting point was. And beautifully, you know, they've come to Christ and they're precious sisters, and everyone in the church calls mama now. Do you know what I mean? And it's
great.
It's beautiful.
It's so cool, man. And, you know, just one of the things I've always appreciated about you, Dai, is it's interesting you talked about that delay of 4 years in the beginning, because you and I were pretty tight. And, you know, the one thing I learned about you, and still to this day watch you, you're fun to watch. If you guys have never, you can go to @Dai Hankey on Twitter. You got to follow Dai on Twitter. That's a fun ride. But the cool thing about Dai is, you know, in America, Dai, you know how it is over there. There's no celebrities in the UK. If you're a celebrity in the UK, probably something's wrong, right? But if you're just, you know, you're doing your thing, that's how it works over there, because you don't have swaths of Christian people. If you're a Christian, you're in the minority.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, the thing is that what's hard for Americans to understand is the whole celebrity in America equals doer. And it's not real. So the thing I've always appreciated about you is kind of like we were saying before, you're a talker, you're a great talker, but you're a doer. So a lot of this stuff that you're talking about here, this is all the cutting edge stuff that the talkers in America talk about. But in America, talk is cheap. And often people will talk about stuff they never do. And so to chat to you about this, one of the things I've always noticed, you just get on with it. You just do it. You don't wait for the perfect setup, right? You don't wait for everything to be in place. For you, you'll go in. You've done your research, like you said, for 4 years. But are you self-aware of that? Like, are you kind of self-aware about, I will run in and do things sometimes, not in a bad way, but like, there is an impetus in you where you go and get it done. Have you kind of reflected on that a bit?
Yeah, and I think it has its benefits and it also has its challenges, because people who do stuff can often do things because that's what they want to do rather than because it's the right thing to do. I think as I'm getting older, I'm getting a bit more wise to the fact that a lot of the things I've done by God's grace, they've worked. Not everything has worked. And I've always lived with a sort of slight fear, if that's not too ungodly a word, but a slight fear of I'm more scared of like looking back on things and saying, I wish I'd had a go, than like looking back on things saying, well, I tried that and that completely blew up. I'm much more scared of like missing it than like, you know, than getting it wrong and having a stab at something. And I do think that there's a lot of people that just chat a lot, but don't actually do anything. And I'm not guilty of that, but I am guilty, I think, of having, you know, people that are close to me are increasingly realizing that because of the character that I've got, number one, I think that I create chaos wherever I go, because people who do things and get bored really quickly. And I've realized that like that's not always a good thing. And starting something well is actually, this might sound cocky, and if it is cocky, I'm sorry about that. But I personally think it's easy to start things, and it's very difficult to leave things well, to have a, you know, and I think that by God's grace, I've never left a church badly. I've never left a group of people around who hate my guts, you know, and that's costly. You have to work at that. But like by God's grace, you know, I want to finish things well. But increasingly, that means I think I have to probably start less things, because I can't do a million things. You know, I don't want to do a million things well. I want to do a couple of things excellently. And so I'm learning to sort of like be a bit more measured in what I do and don't do, what I start and I don't start. And I also think that once you started something, then basically you stick at it until God tells you otherwise. There's some people seem to live as if they're always waiting for the next thing. You know, when the next thing comes, then that's going to be the thing. I think that's nonsense. Like, I think that you do what God's told you to do, and you do it with all your heart until He tells you compellingly what's next. And then when He tells you what's next, don't dilly-dally, obey. But until He's told you, then you're doing this, and you need to do it well. Otherwise, you get this kind of fudgy kind of bit where you're waiting, you know, to sort of like, you know, I'm not sure if I should be here, but I'm also not sure what should be next, and so you don't really do anything. You just kind of like procrastinate. So I just think that like whatever you're doing, do it fully, and then as soon as you know God has told you to do something else, then, you know, leave well and do that fully. And that requires godly people, in my life at least, godly people to talk things through with. understanding and discerning the will of God. Is this just, is this God, or have I just had too much cheese today? And just having people that can speak into that, trust in the scriptures, trust in the Spirit, and trust in the church of God to sort of help you to make wise decisions. And to me, I think that the way I've often encouraged people who are praying through whether they should take an opportunity or not is just do what you're meant to be doing, until not doing what you think you should be doing, next feels like disobedience not to do it. As soon as you get to that point where, if I don't do this, I can't look God in the eye and pray anymore because I know I'm disobeying him. You're probably meant to be doing that. But until you're at that point, you just need to sort of be patient and be faithful and serve and sow, in the meantime. So if I have
Dai, we got some questions coming in here, and I'm going to jump into some of them. If you've got some questions for Dai, go ahead and submit it there in the chat or in the Q&A function there, and we'll make sure that we get to as many of them as possible. Some of the questions that have come in, you're already starting to hit on some of them, Dai, but one of them being in regards to how the three entities work together, if they feed into each other at any point, specifically, the church, the charity, and then the business. And then maybe a good follow-up to that is also, personally, how do you split your time? You talked about that a little bit, but do you have shared leadership across the three entities? Can you talk a little bit about how they relate to each other?
Yeah, okay, yes, they're really helpful to think through. So there's people that have worked for me that are now in my church, people that have been baptized, people that have come to Christ, people that have worked for me who hate the church and have no intention of coming across the threshold. And, so we didn't set the church up, the business up, as a sort of sneaky way of doing mission. We set it up because we felt it was a good way of serving people in the city who've been exploited and trying to genuinely help them and love them for the love of Christ. But that doesn't mean I'm not praying regularly for the people, and I don't desire to share the love of Christ, which made me the kind of person that would want to do that with them. And so we do, and it is, it is a beautiful, joyful gospel environment there. We currently have 3 members of staff working for us at the moment, 3 different ladies who are roasting with us. One of them has come to church a couple of times. The other 2 never have. So we just seek to love them with the love of Christ. There's others who have come and have been baptized and have become part of the church family, and we love them dearly. And others who've come and gone and have never darkened the doors. The Red Community thing, that's more kind of like a charity where we basically just do the befriending project and we pray a lot, and it's a great focal point for prayer, but it's a Wales-wide thing, not a Cardiff-based thing. And so it feels more of a kind of a prophetic call to people to just pray and seek to make, just to seek to pursue justice and mercy wherever they're at in Wales. So there are people in my church who are trained befrienders and who have brought people to the church who they befriended. But that's, I wouldn't say that there's a huge overlap between the Red Community stuff and either of the other 2, the church and the coffee business. I guess there's more. And then how do I sort of split my time between them? In many ways, because I'm not paid by any of them, I have the beautiful gospel flexibility to freestyle it a little bit. So there's different seasons. So when I first started the church plant, I was probably mainly focusing on the church plant. I planned it alone, just me and my wife. I know that was probably stupid, but then God sent a brother from the States, actually from Missouri, or Misery as I call it, to him and his family came and they've joined the church. He's now a co-elder, and he's a Bible teacher. I'm a ranter. He's a Bible teacher. I'm kind of out here, there, everywhere, a million ideas. He's just a faithful, gospel-hearted, Bible-loving guy, and I couldn't do what I do without him. But he went back to the States in December, and he was there till August because of lockdown. So although there was 2 of us elding the church, I was kind of elding it on my own, on the ground. So that required a lot more time. But the other thing which happened is just before lockdown, the person that was running Manumit resigned, leaving Manumit having to sort of be run as well. And my co-director, Nick, he was in Uganda, and he got stuck in Uganda because of lockdown. So I was in a situation where I was elding the church on my own, and the coffee business had one person had just quit, and the other person was in Uganda and couldn't get back for a month or so. So I had to like just basically prioritize the coffee business, just to keep it going. And then God in his kindness, like the coffee business tripled in size over lockdown because everybody was stuck at home and wanted to drink coffee. So, you know, our sales went through the roof, our workload went through the roof. But God in his kindness, like we just invited in the day before lockdown happened, a young Mozambican intern, a young guy, a theology student, amazing young guy called Paulo. He moved in March, and he's like gospel-hearted dude and also very administratively gifted. And he actually, I couldn't have done either the church, the Zoom services, or the coffee stuff without him. So God was very kind. But since then, I'm now 2 days a week doing the coffee business. I'm probably technically 2 to 3 days a week doing the church, but at the moment I'm on a bit of a break from preaching in church because I'm just burnt out, to be honest with you. And Ross came back from America. He was all sort of G'd up, you know. He had his kind of like, you know, he had his little time out in the stage. He's like, woohoo! And I was like, oh, bro, God bless you. So week before last, he said, Dai, you're exhausted. Have a couple of months off and just do some stuff which is good for your soul. I'm very grateful to him for that. So at the moment, I'm kind of I got an elders meeting tomorrow, but I'm not preaching on Sunday. So I feel like I got a slightly less responsibility than I did. But it changes, man. It's seasonal, and family requires different chunks of my time as well. I got 4 kids. I coach a football team for one of them. Take them to dance. Just different things, like just trying to be a faithful parent, and trying not to shipwreck my marriage in the middle of it all as well. So just bouncing around, man. I think that's what I like about not being paid by any of them. It means the person I actually fear is God. And if I need to tweak things and change things, there's not a contract hanging over my head. And not everyone is blessed with that situation, but I think for me, that's probably been a real gift.
Well, that leads into our next question. I think people watching are going, hey, how does this guy get paid? And that was our question, was if you don't get paid by any of these entities, how are you funded? I know this, but our audience does not.
Yeah, we actually found that like selling cannabis like on the weekends and dark evenings was
hey, you don't just sound like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
No, that's all, man. Why does Dai keep buying those UV light bulbs? People just support what we're doing, and they just like give to us. And like, so there's a church which is my sending church, my home church, a church called Highfields in Cardiff, and they very kindly just allow people to put money in their bank account with my name attached to it. And there's a friend of mine who's an accountant. He helps me to sort of fill out my tax return forms every year. I'm technically self-employed, but it's one of them things like, I think one of the ways that God's going to show me one day that either like my time is done or that, I've messed up or something, like maybe that, people will stop supporting me. I don't know. But like, I just feel that like, while the Lord is putting it on people's hearts to want to support what we're doing, then people are, and that's how I've lived for literally since 1999. I've been doing that. And it's just worked because God's faithful, and I just like proving His faithfulness. And I don't get loads of money. Like, I'm not wealthy, I got a battered car, and I got a house with 4 taps, and 2 of my taps in my house don't work. And I want to get it sorted, but right now we're struggling to get hold of a builder. But I can't pay through the nose to get some sort of high flying plumber in. I've got to pick the right person at the right price. I mean, I'm not minted, but I'm content. And that's God's just looked after us. He always has. My kids get Christmas presents every year and breakfast in the mornings. Happy days.
Yeah, it's funny because this is one thing for all of you to know. Like, people have to actually like you. See, people don't like me, so I always had to go get a job. But that whole idea of starting a church, Dai, that was one thing that I don't really know if there was another option in Wales, but because of so much depression, economic depression, unemployment, stuff like that, I think that, yeah, you could start and you could get a pay, but you were never going to get a full paycheck. And so if you wanted to do it in Wales, you did it for love of the game.
100%, man. Like, there's no way you go into church planting anywhere, but especially in Wales, for the paycheck. I mean, half my church are asylum seekers. They get £37 a week. Do you know what I mean? Like, what the heck?
Which is like $50-$60 for Americans,
Yeah, and so yeah, there's no money in this, but there's joy.
Daniel, you got anything?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just really blessed and encouraged by what you're doing out there, Di. Maybe my last question, or not a question, but prompt for you is, again, I keep coming back to, in some ways, I know the UK is different from America. I know Wales is different from the rest of the UK. So, you know, not all of our contexts are the same. But I think you're probably seeing some things that are ahead of the curve for Americans. Can you speak prophetically, Di? I mean, just man, just releasing you to what would you like to say to the church in North America in terms of staying engaged in the mission, in terms of you know, our obedience to Jesus as Lord of the church, and you know, from what you're seeing across the pond in terms of maybe some things that maybe we need to disengage from, and in order for us to re-engage in the right thing. So, man, open mic for that.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if this is prophetic, but this is like, I guess, my loving exhortation to my brothers and sisters in the States. I think the church has had a seat at the top table for a long time, just like it did in Wales. And I wonder whether it's time to graciously leave that seat at the top table before you get pushed off it. The church was always intended to thrive in the margins. And the way that I see the church, the way that God's hardwired the church, is not to gain political influence or social influence or influence through the media. Those things can happen. God can graciously bring that about. But I read the scriptures, I read church history, and what I see is ordinary men and women and children who are just thriving against all the odds, often suffering in the margins. And the darker it gets, the brighter the light shines. And but I think that if you're the ones that choose to leave that seat at the top table rather than getting pushed off it, you're probably in a better position to sort of like, you know, you probably won't hit the floor quite as hard. I might be able to reposition yourself where you're meant to be, rather than like, you know, have to rub your head for a bit before working out what the next move is. That would be my kind of loving exhortation. We were meant to thrive in the margins. Don't resent that. Don't despise that. Get back into the Bible and realize that you were made for that. You were born for that. And you know, there's some crazy things happening in the margins. Never gets tweeted about. Never gets CNN reporting on it, or you know, Sky News. It don't get reported on, but it's happening. There's this beautiful grace being unleashed in the margins all over the world, and I think that that's where we need to be.
That's beautiful, man. And you know, just along those lines, I've kind of been amazed. Daniel and I are sitting here behind the scenes, and we know the questions we're going to ask you, you know, as we have them written down here. This is very much a spirit guided conversation. I mean, at each point I keep wanting to say, wow, that was a perfect segue to our next question. But I feel like I want to ask you, it's completely off the reservation here, but I want to ask you about prayer, because one of the things that again, you mentioned a few pitfalls with this, and I appreciate, Dai, your honesty, man, just really being down to earth and honest. And if we're talking about, you know, people hearing this, maybe it's the trendy thing or whatever, but you really put an emphasis today on prayer and seeking God's will, having that vision. You're like, look, this was unique. I've never had this before or since. Can you just back up a little bit and tell us about your prayer life and those rhythms and how you seek God? And maybe just really bring it, because I think a lot of people are rushing ahead to want to know how to do all this cool, flashy stuff, and they're not taking that step back and going, that doesn't matter unless this is here, because this over here comes out of that. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I suck at prayer. I think I feel like a hypocrite whenever I talk about prayer, because I genuinely, theologically, deep down, personally believe that prayer is like the absolute, you know, epicenter of anything significant that God does in this world. I really believe that. I really do believe that, like, those bowls of incense in heaven that are filled with the prayers of the saints, like, I don't know how our prayers end up in them bowls, but I believe they do. What a cool thing to do, like, to see your prayer life as filling bowls in heaven that come before the Lord and smell good to him. Like, I don't get how that works, but I believe it, and yet I struggle. Do you know what I mean? So my prayer life, you know, there are times when I got energy. I can get up in the morning early and just pray, you know, on my knees before I do anything in the day. More often than not, I'm exhausted. I crawl out of bed. I take my dog for a walk and I pray to the Lord as I'm walking my dog. I pray to the Lord throughout the day. I sing praise. I think that might be a Welsh thing, but I like singing prayers and singing my kind of like petitions to the Lord. Just not like just walking down the street, that'd be weird, but just in my car or when I'm on my own. I often sing prayers to the Lord. And at the end of every day, myself and Paolo, the intern, who's still stuck here because of lockdown, we spend time praying, every evening together as well. I don't think it's a case of though, like, so if I do 3 months of prayer, then I'm ready to plant the church, or if I do 2, like how long have you prayed? I think that if prayer has to be like what you start with and you never stop, you never move on from. It's not like the foundation stone. When you've got enough prayer in, then you can start getting pragmatic. I think that however good you are or not at praying at the beginning of a church plant or at the beginning of anything which you're trying to do for the Lord, that's kind of going to mark what it's going to be like from that point moving forward. So like, and sometimes you got to pray yourself into praying, and so that would be one thing I would say. There is a scripture, if I just really quickly share scripture just off my phone. This wasn't planned, obviously, so I'm just going to quickly call it up off my phone, which I personally find has been really formative for both church stuff, but also especially with the kind of anti-slavery stuff that I do. It's in Luke chapter 18, the parable of the persistent widow, which I'm sure is familiar to a lot of people. But I just love, I think the first verse of that, of Luke 18 is really, really helpful for those who have a heart for ministry, have a heart for justice, have a heart for reaching out to the broken and the hurting. Listen to this. It says, Jesus told them a parable to the effect that they ought to always pray and not lose heart. And I think the fact that Jesus told them a parable because he knew that A, they probably weren't always going to pray otherwise, and B, they were going to lose heart. Like, that's why he told them the parable. So I just love the fact that Jesus gave us a parable to meditate on, because we want to always be praying and we want to never lose heart in prayer. And yeah, I'm not always praying and I do lose heart in prayer. I just love the fact that Jesus knew that, so he gave us that parable. So I regularly come back to that parable again and again. And that whole persistent widow thing, we're just meant to like be irritating, impotent. I think that Jesus says in another one of his passages. You might open the door to that guy because he's your friend, but because he's an impotent git, then he opens the door and we just got to keep knocking. And so that's what I would see as a huge part of any gospel ministry, is to always pray and never lose heart, even if your prayers are small, weak, and pathetic. Just don't stop. And tonight I was coaching my football team, and they're all like out of shape and struggling with fitness after the lockdown season, and so like they just don't want to run. And so I made them run around the pitches as a warm-up lap, and like half of them just were walking for most of it. So when they came back, I said, right guys, here's the thing, yeah, I got to make you do that again, because I can't let that be your warm-up lap, because it was terrible. You just walked. I said, I totally get you probably can't run the whole way, but just don't walk. Jog really slowly, but just don't stop running, because like stopping running isn't acceptable. Being so knackered you can only jog at snail's pace, that's fine. And I think it's exactly the same with prayer. I sometimes I'm like that kid who really would rather just sit down, but I've just got to somehow keep scraping the bottoms of my feet across that that pitch, and just keep that really pathetic, awful looking jog going on in prayer, because otherwise I'm going to sit down and might not get back up again. So
I feel you, man. And you know what? And I think Daniel and I both will 100% agree with everything you just said. But brother, we first time we've ever had someone ask, they said, hey, how can I pray for Dai? And we got about 30 seconds, so it'll be a quick...
Simple answer, man. I'm taking some time out to try and refresh my heart and my mind, to be there for my family, to be present there. I'm praying that, I'll be able to get the right balance, with work, with ministry, with my family. So just pray that God would meet with me through his word and by his spirit. And I would by December time, I'll be a different dude.
And if you guys want to catch up with Dai and support anything he's doing, again, it's at Dai Hankey on Twitter. You can find him out. Do you still have a website, Dai?
We've got the manumitcoffee.co.uk. We've got redeemerchurch.org.uk. I have got a blog, but I never blog anymore, so I won't bother looking for that.
Yep. Sanctified Rant. Is that the rad blog back in the day? So, guys, thanks for joining us today for Frontlines. I've been Peyton Jones, my co-host Daniel Yang. We want to thank you, and of course, Dai Hankey with us here today. Can't thank you enough for joining us, Dai, and we thank all of you for joining us on behalf of Exponential. And we'll see you next time on Frontlines.